On the record. Seeing it's 5 p.m., I'd like to call the April 16th, 2025 joint work session of the Save Kenai Council and Planning and Zoning to order. And I'd like to, soon I'll pledge them here. The first thing we have here is a presentation, the main reason we're here for the work session. We have a presentation with R&M Consultants draft SS 4A Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. And we have, I think, online, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, Malaya Walters from Michael Baker and Ryan Gensel from R&M. We have them online? Oh, here we go. And I'll give you the floor.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I am Malia Walters from Michael Baker International, and let me share my screen really quick so you can all see my presentation. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. And I do just want to be really respectful of everyone's time. Is there a specific time limit you'd like me to try to stick to? Otherwise, I can just go through the presentation as planned, which has been taking about 45 minutes to an hour with Q&A.
Okay, we have a council meeting at 6 p.m., so we'd like to probably wrap it up about, you got about 50 minutes or so, let's say.
Okay, great. That is plenty. Yes. All right. So, as I said, my name is Malia Walters with Michael Baker International. We are one of the consultants working with the Kenai Peninsula Borough on this project. And Ryan from R&M is also here to support this presentation and speak later about some of our priority project locations. And at the borough, we have been working with Robert Ruffner, Selena Robinson, and Brenda Alberg as part of the project team. So you might be wondering, why do we need this plan? And it's really tied to the number of serious and fatal injury crashes in the borough. There were over 3,000 total crashes between 2018 and 2022. And of those, 44 were fatal crashes, and over 150 resulted in a serious injury. And I think it's important to point out that those are just the crash numbers. It's not necessarily the same as the number of people involved in those crashes. So, at least one person per crash, but sometimes more. So this is really what's driving this effort, is just to reduce the number of crashes, because ultimately, no fatalities should be acceptable on our roadways. And if we look at the crash trends from 2018 to 2022, we can see that the number of fatal crashes has been trending up, and the number of serious injury crashes has essentially stayed the same, increased a little bit, and both having a slight dip in 2020, likely due to COVID. So, as I said, this is really driving the effort here, because these are people involved in 13 fatal crashes, family members, friends, neighbors. We want to get that number down to 0, and that is what this plan is aiming to help do. And you might be wondering too, just why we chose 2018 to 2022 data. That is what was most recently available through our sources, and it is also what the grant program is requiring for this round of funding eligibility. So at the time that this plan was drafted, 2022 was the most recent data available. So using all that crash data, we did create what's called a high injury network, and that lets us visualize where in the borough these fatal and serious injury crashes are taking place. And I think this is a really stark statistic, and it's that 74% of roadway fatalities and serious injuries are occurring on just 4% of roads in the borough. And if we look at this map, which is a little hard to read, but if you do look at the plan, you can maybe zoom in a little bit on it. But these yellow areas are the areas that most crashes are happening. So you can see it's a lot of crashes on the Seward Highway, a lot of crashes on the Sterling Highway, the Kenai Spur, down in Seward. So those yellow areas are really where a lot of our focus went to, just because that is where a lot of the fatalities and serious injuries are happening. And hopefully you've heard a little bit about this plan before, but if not, I'm glad you're here now. We did get out in person to Homer, Soldotna, and Seward earlier in this planning process. We also hosted a few virtual workshops, and lately have been doing this set of outreach to planning commissions to various communities around the borough. Early on in the planning process, we also conducted a safety survey to get input from the community, and we got over 700 responses, which I think is a really good showing from the borough. We also had a steering committee that met 6 times. We met with city staff, and we also met with the Kenai Peninsula mayor as well. So we did some pretty robust public engagement, and we're here again now to finish it off. So one of the main parts of this plan is to recommend various policies and programs that can ultimately help reduce fatalities and serious injuries on a roadway. And these policies and programs are also complementary to specific priority location project recommendations. So we'll get more into the priority project recommendations later, but really quickly, we do want to touch on these programs and process recommendations, which aren't quite as, I want to say, concrete as the priority projects might be, but they're still very important to the planning process. So some of these things that were recommended through the plan for the Kenai Peninsula Borough would be emergency evacuation routes. And there's some interesting statistics included in the plan, and I'll share some here with you. But according to a mapping tool from the US DOT, 73% of the borough is classified as experiencing climate and disaster risk burden. And this ultimately means that these are areas of the borough that have a high score in this area and experience more financial loss due to climate-related hazards, such as floods and serious weather events and things like this. So this is something that we thought was important to the borough just due to that alone, but there's a section in the plan that talks about emergency evacuation routes and how to, make this process better going forward, which could include not building new roadways that aren't connected to other roadways and having single access and things like that. So that's one of these process recommendations. Another recommendation through the plan was a demonstration project, a safety emphasis roadway program. And this would be a short-term initiative on a specific section of roadway to help increase roadway safety. This could be things like ad campaigns, user education, increased enforcement, changes to emergency response, and potentially some low and medium cost, more concrete solutions like signs or more pavement markings. So that demonstration project was something included in the plan, as well as this recommendation to conduct a borough-wide school zone safety study. So the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District operates a total of 42 schools, and the majority of those are physical schools that are located on the road system. Of the 42 schools, 17 are Title I schools, and the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District uses Title I funds to serve K-12 students who have a 40% or higher percentage of being economically disadvantaged. So that's what a Title I school is. And so of those 42 schools, 17 are Title I, and of the 17 Title I schools, 4 are located on that high injury network. And if we remember, the high injury network is where the majority of the crashes in the Kenai Peninsula Borough are happening that are fatal or result in serious injuries. And in addition to those 4 schools that are located on the high injury network, 3 are located within a quarter mile of the high injury network. So that's 7 schools that are located really close to the set of roads that have been producing the most fatal and serious injury crashes. So the plan does recommend conducting a school zone safety study. And lastly, of interest might be the Eastern Peninsula Highway Emergency Service Area. The plan recommends developing a 5-year emergency services plan. As we all know, Alaska can sometimes be a really unforgiving place, and there's areas of the Sterling Highway and Seward Highway that are just really tough to work in for a lot of the year, especially the winter, due to like lack of shoulders, no cell phone service, things like that can really impact emergency response. So the need for emergency services in this area is outgrowing what can probably currently be provided by the great volunteers of Bear Creek, Cooper Landing, Hope, and Moose Pass. And ultimately, we're not recommending to take anything away from those volunteers, but instead help supplement their efforts. So potentially with paid employees or something like that, but that would be something that should be studied further in a 5-year plan. And I know this slide has a lot of words on it, so I'm not going to read them all out to you, but just kind of hit the high level points here. The Comprehensive Safety Action Plan really draws on the ideas of what's called the safe system approach. And that is kind of a holistic approach to looking at roadway safety, which says that we should think about safe people, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. And the plan wrote up a series of recommendations to address each part of that safe system approach. And that's what we're seeing here in these bullets. So these are all recommendations of what the borough might do to help accomplish the safe people goal. So for example, it could be having a working group, having some complete streets policies, safety walking tours, etc. And these are all included in the plan. Like I said, I'm not going to read them all out loud to you here. Another core part of the safe system approach is the safe vehicles. Again, these are more policies and programs, not necessarily concrete projects that are being recommended, but still important part of this process. As part of the recommendations for the safe speeds aspect of this plan, the plan does recommend a speed management plan. And this was something that was recommended by Alaska Department of Transportation to be added to this plan. By having this recommendation in the plan, they will be able to potentially get funding through a grant program. So DOT has been involved, and that was one of their recommendations to include in this process. Again, safe roads, a lot of words here, a lot of policies that are recommended about different ways to achieve that safe roads goal. And lastly, post-crash care, and that's caring for people in the event of an accident to try to mitigate any serious injuries or fatalities. And this could include things like increased funding for EMS, training opportunities, or rehab programs. So those were all more programs and process recommendations. So like I said, not necessarily as concrete as going out and building a crosswalk or something like that, but um, specific treatments to specific roads are something that were also recommended in this plan. And as part of that, the plan lists a lot of proven safety countermeasures. And a safety countermeasure is essentially something that we can do to a road to help reduce crashes. And the plan pulled from the Federal Highway Administration's proven safety countermeasures. So these are all things that are known to help reduce crashes. And this is not like this list that's included in the plan. It's not saying that if you're gonna work on a road in the borough, you can only draw from this set of treatments. That's not the case. It's just really striving to help, people make decisions and provide inspiration when projects are being designed. And these are some examples of the countermeasures with these little icons. You will see these later on in the priority project maps. And I'm not going to read them all off, but they do address, specific core areas like speed management, intersections, and roadway departures. So, for example, speed feedback signs are a proven countermeasure for speed management. A roundabout might be a proven countermeasure to improve safety at an intersection, and then enhanced delineation for curves is a proven countermeasure for roadway departure. And again, we also have pedestrians and cross-cutting. So pedestrians and bicycles, but um, it's things like bike lanes, median and pedestrian refuge islands, beacons, pedestrian intervals, signs, more visibility. And then these cross-cutting measures can be things like corridor management plans, road safety audits, local road safety plans, and more. So like I said, the plan does contain 20 priority projects that are recommended to receive treatment from some of these countermeasures. And you might be wondering, how did we decide which projects to prioritize? Um, and we have this really kind of set way of scoring projects to make sure that all the decisions are data-driven and in line with the grant requirements. So the scoring criteria for priority project locations, it includes whether or not an area is on the high injury network. So if it's on the high injury network, it gets points. If it's not on the high injury network, it does not get points. It also takes into consideration the number of crashes that resulted in a fatality or serious injury, and that is what KSI means, killed or seriously injured. So if there's a high density of KSI crashes, it's going to get more points. If there's no KSI crashes, it's going to get no points. And then as part of the previous round of grant funding, the plan did take equity into consideration, and that was scored using a national tool that was available. This is something that has changed a little bit with the new administration, but it was taken into account through the previous grant program. So that's that. And then the community feedback score draws on that community safety survey that I talked about earlier. So if a lot of people mentioned an area, it got more points assigned to it. If no one mentioned it, it didn't get points assigned to it. So we really did listen to people directly. And then lastly, we took into consideration whether or not the area was in close proximity to destinations that vulnerable road users might use. And these are things like schools, bus stations, parks, things like that. Vulnerable road users are people who walk or roll down the roads, so pedestrians, people pushing strollers, people in wheelchairs, so on and so forth. So if that area, if that location is within a quarter mile of one of those destinations, it gets more points, but if it's not close, it's not going to get points. And then lastly, in an effort to be inclusive of all areas of the borough, there was one priority project location that was included for each partner city, regardless of if it scored high enough to rank or not. So essentially, that's to make sure that not all the projects were just on the main road system, but it also includes a project in Seldovia, a project in Homer, Kenai, Saldana. So we scored a bunch of road segments using that criteria that I just listed. And then we also compared those segments to projects that are already in the DOT STIP, which is a statewide transportation improvement program. And any area, any roadway that was already going to be being upgraded by a project in the STIP, we did not include it as a priority location, just for the sake of not being redundant with our work. So we removed any redundant programs, and like I said, included one road segment in each of the 5 partner cities. And that left us with our top 20 scoring priority locations. And each of the locations comes with low, medium, and high cost recommendations. And I believe Ryan is going to be able to speak more to some specific locations. We're not going to go over all 20 right now, but we will discuss some that are probably of interest to you there in Kenai.
So the first one that we have in Kenai is on Kenai Spur Highway, kind of in the middle of town here. Some of the bigger things for this location was lighting for the majority of this stretch, and then extending the pathway through town or building a pathway through town up north toward Nikiski. That was another big thing that we heard. A few intersection improvements up on the northern end of the road there by Redoubt Avenue. And then some kind of a corridor management plan through town with like medians and turn lanes, maybe a signal or two, maybe some roundabouts, something to kind of consolidate driveways and side roads to calm traffic and kind of eliminate conflict points and decision points. Next slide. The next one here is kind of more in Soldotna. Kenai Spur Highway and the Sterling Highway. There's just a lot of again driveways and side roads that tends to create a lot of friction with the different movements with cars wanting to turn or go through through the roadway here. So some kind of an access management through this corridor would be, I think, is probably the best route to go through it. And there's a bunch of different ways you can tackle something like this. Next slide. Bridge access road. There were a lot of comments regarding this one. A lot of it centered around lighting and a pathway. I know there's a project that kind of builds it from, I think it's the Kenai Spur down to Beaver Loop. So just kind of connecting that to K Beach Road. We heard a lot of comments regarding that. Then next, yeah. So there's on the Kenai Spur Highway up in Nikiski, some kind of a curve delineation for this thing. Another idea that we threw out was, moving the Hollybeck Street intersection to the left there or to the west to kind of line up there and make it like a 4-way intersection, and maybe you put some kind of a flashing beacon at that intersection to kind of highlights people like, hey, there's turning traffic, gets people attention to look out and not kind of speed through that zone, especially with the school there to the north. And lighting too. I think lighting goes a long way. It's not super expensive, but I think it adds a lot of safety benefits for a lower cost for an investment. Next slide. The Seward Highway. There's a lot you could do with this, and I think this is more of a DOT thing, but highlighting the fact that, there's a lot of crashes that happens along this stretch, especially through the pass and around the Hope Highway curve. I was digging in through a lot of the crash data, and most of them centered around vehicles going off the road. So that we said, hey, maybe look at some roadside design improvement, like flattening slopes. That kind of reduces the severity. People will go off the road when it's icy, but at least they won't get seriously injured or worse. It'll kind of be more of a minor injury thing. Another super expensive alternative, if you really want to eliminate these crossover head-on collisions, would be some kind of a divided highway, and that's kind of a long-term plan that may be in the works. But wider edge lanes with reflective paint, I think, goes a long way too, to kind of help people to pay attention. And then around the Hope Highway area, some realignment of the highway through there. It's kind of tight. Driving around that curve, it tends to there's some sketchy spots in that tends to not be very easily to drive through, especially in the winter. Next slide. So, yep, that's all we have for the Kenai Center area. We have others down in Homer and Soldotna, but we kind of highlighted the ones that kind of pertain to the Kenai area.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And we can go back and certainly dive into those projects more with questions too. We just have a few more slides to get to, and then we can open it up to Q&A. But just want to go over some next steps here. And the public comment period for this draft plan is currently open. So we really encourage everyone to submit comments. You can do that in written format, or you can go to our website, and I will put a link in the chat to that website too. So as I said, we are doing this series of Planning Commission presentations right now. And we have one last meeting with their steering committee happening in about a month after the public comment period is over. And then eventually the goal is to have the plan adopted by the end of June. So there is currently a notice of funding opportunity out for the Safe Streets for All grant funding program. And to be eligible for this round of funding, the plan must be approved. I think it's by June 26th. So we're getting there. So like I said, the plan is available for public comment. You can visit the website or submit written comments to the planning department or to the project website. So I will drop this link in the chat, but otherwise, thank you for listening, and we would love to hear your questions if you have any.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Walters or Mr. Gensel? Want to start off? I'll kick off here. So when you look at the Kenai Priority 1, Kenai Spur Highway, that looks like it's a pretty extensive crash history there. Do you have any idea what type of crashes that we're talking about here? Because that mostly is a pretty reduced speed 4-lane road, fairly decent lighting, I think, for most of that, except for that section going out to the Nikiski. But just surprising the amount of crashes there. Do you have any? I guess I'm asking, was there consistently a more of a different type of crash than others, or you can shed a little light on that?
I can't remember. I don't think we have a lot of the data for the non-injury crashes. most of the data we got was for like the KSI stuff with killed or seriously injured. And I think a lot of them kind of centered around, kind of one-off things like a DUI kind of stuff, that wasn't really anything really with the roadway. Um, but kind of reading through the public comments, this is kind of what we developed with like proven countermeasures. Some of the drivers felt unsafe with certain things, like especially driving in the dark, lighting, they wanted lighting. And then I think there was some kind of up near Redoubt and Wildwood there. People were expressing concerns about turning out onto the highway with some kind of reasonable time frame. So it's kind of a, making it safer in the ways that, they wouldn't be doing any kind of risky maneuvers. So kind of improving what's out there now to kind of prevent like a KSI crash.
Yeah, sure. And was there any relation between the season? Was there a spike in it depending on the season that you had, winter or summer? Did you know?
Not that I can recall. I think there was kind of spread out between summer and fall and winter.
Okay. Very good. Any questions from council? And we got our planning and zoning commissioner here. Ms. Patty?
Have these studies been already approved in other locations in the lower 48?
I can talk about that a little bit. Do you mean these types of treatments like the proven safety countermeasures, or are you speaking specifically about Safe Streets for All plans?
I was speaking to the, let me just go over here. With the studies that y'all are recommending, do the studies actually help reduce the KISs? Because I know that you said that there were a number of different studies that y'all wanted to implement, and I was just wondering how effective the studies were to reduce the KISs.
Oh, all right. So these project and program recommendations. I don't know if there's.
You were mentioning that there were two different studies that were going to be implemented with these grants. So I was just wondering how effective the studies were in reducing the KISs and also making the streets safer, if you're just doing studies. That's my question.
Yeah, I'm not sure which studies exactly you're speaking of, and I can't speak to what has worked in the lower 48. But as part, like the next step in this planning process is essentially to leverage this plan to apply for grant funding to fund these programs and or projects with the goal of reducing those fatal and serious injury crashes. And I apologize if I misspoke and said there's only two studies that were going to come out of this, because that's not necessarily the case. But I will say that Anchorage passed a Safe Streets for All plan a few years ago, maybe 2 years ago, and they were able to get grant funding. So that's a local example of it. Whether or not it has led to a direct decrease in KSI crashes is harder to say. But I don't know, Ryan, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I'll speak to the countermeasures. The ones we kind of listed earlier that Malia was talking about, that we have icons for, those were we grabbed those from the FHWA, and those are all proven treatments that get applied to various situations across the country. So there's data that back up some of these improvements across the country.
Okay, well, this was, you were talking about the school zone safety study that you wanted to do, and then there was another safety study that y'all wanted to do. And do these safety studies have to be implemented in order for a grant availability to be an option?
Okay, yeah, that is a good question. So the plan does recommend these schools on safety studies or the safety emphasis roadway program. Those would cost money to do, and there's always a question of who's going to pay for that. So those are potentially studies that could get funded through grant funding by having this plan. So by having this plan, the borough is able to apply for more grant funding to conduct more planning efforts, such as a school safety study, or to implement road safety improvements, such as those projects that Ryan spoke about.
And if I could ask one last question, who approves this plan, ma'am?
That is a great question. It is going to go before the assembly, and that is going to happen later in June. So it goes before the Planning Commission on June 9th, and then the assembly on June 17th.
Any further questions? Vice Mayor Nexon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. One thing that raises my eyebrows a little bit, it's under strategies for the Kenai Peninsula Borough. And the word requiring construction of in platted right-of-way. And that is something that's been resisted here for quite some time. But I'm not sure how that, and maybe you stated it before, how that is a solution for safety. If somebody plats a right-of-way in a subdivision, that they have to develop the road first.
And that's in regard to the emergency evacuation routes, I believe. Let me go back to it. Sorry to buzz
Yeah, I'm
through
not sure what
these.
the sideboards are on that. If it's a cul-de-sac that serves 3 lots and somebody subdivides it and nobody lives there.
Yeah, that's a good question. Ryan, do you have any insight into that?
I think that, wouldn't that kind of be kind of a planning and zoning thing? You know, if somebody wanted to build a subdivision, maybe there would be some kind of ordinance that would require the developer to kind of make sure that there's either a secondary access or a good access in and out of there.
That secondary access, that would be a platting thing, but this is requiring construction within a right-of-way. So that would be the whole
Yeah.
subdivision, as I understand it.
Yeah, I'm just not too sure on what that would entail.
And I will say, if any of this is kind of pinging to you as, like you said, has been heavily resisted, that might be a good comment to submit as a comment to the plan. We're always taking those, and I'll write that down as a comment here too. So thank you.
Further questions? Councilmember Dothon.
Yeah, I would do say the projects, several of the projects that you listed in Kenai, I know I've heard about, and it's been on a wish list, I know, for a lot of community members to have that connection of the bike path across bridge access. I think that's kind of connects one of the main bike paths that would connect Kenai and Soldotna. It's kind of one of the last pieces that we just don't have there, but the cost to do that has always been pretty astronomical. So if it's a project that they could justify through grant funding, I think that would be a very sought after piece of the pie to connect that all together and finally finish that for sure.
Further questions? I do have another question here is, so as you go, it says goes through next step, and then the draft Kenai Peninsula Borough comprehensive study would be, goes to the commission and then the assembly. And then once that's done and it's through the assembly, and then I presume most of these, well, the roads I'm looking at here are actually the State of Alaska Department of Transportation roads. How does that work beyond that into the next steps that we bring them, that they're brought in to go through those priorities?
In terms of working with DOT.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure totally what that process would look like in a practical sense. Maybe Ryan, you do. I saw you just came off mute.
So we've been talking with the DOT planners, and they're very open to. They would be receptive into seeing what you folks have in Kenai and Sildana and Homer. This plan is kind of meant to be like a tool to help them guide their priority list through their funding. So through this plan, we're kind of doing a lot of the legwork for them, and we could say, hey, we have 20 projects here that could be, let's say you have, $20 million to spend somewhere. Here's the top one that we want to put money toward. But it's kind of taken a lot of the legwork out of their end. And when they're looking to spend money down on the borough, you could show this to them. It's like, hey, we have 20 projects that we want to do that will, put a lot of have a lot of bang for their buck. And that's so we identified some of these low cost improvements, mid-range cost improvements, and then high cost improvements to kind of help them prioritize a list of projects that may need to be implemented in the borough.
Would that then circle back into their STIP plan?
Yeah, so they would identify a project, scope it out, and then assign dollar values to these projects. And I think there would be a lot of collaboration with the borough and all the city councils too.
Very good, thank you. Any further questions or comments? Let's see, none. We appreciate you presenting here this afternoon or this evening, and I guess will we have a follow-up after the presentation, after the final product's been delivered?
I don't know if you know the answer to that question, Ryan. I haven't heard of any more presentations that are set to come out to these planning commissions, but I'd say, stay tuned for the planning commission, the Borough Planning Commission, and then the Borough Assembly happening in June. And also the project website is a good place to stay apprised. But Ryan?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be another presentation like this.
Okay, very good. That's so that's what we can keep our eye towards there. Well, again, thank you for presenting to us this evening. Certainly appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah,
Hey, thank you.
you.
So we got about 15 minutes before our council meeting starts here. I forgot. Hey, just before everybody leaves, was there anybody, hang on just a minute, council members, sorry about that, I should have been going through there. I didn't see, was there any commissioner public comment or council or planning commission comments as we move forward? I should have been following my agenda. Okay. I was kind of waiting, I threw that out at the end and nobody said anything, so I just thought I would just be specific here and follow my agenda, so with that, we are adjourned.